The train car rattled, a familiar morning rhythm. Leo scrolled, his thumb moving with a practiced, empty motion. A photo of a friend, standing on a mountain peak at sunrise. Another, a promotion announcement with a shiny new title. A third, a perfectly curated kitchen with steaming coffee and a smiling child. With each image, a small, cold stone settled deep in his chest. He didn't notice the weight anymore. It was just part of him. The air in the train felt thick, heavy. His own reflection in the dark window looked back. Tired, ordinary, a stark contrast to the vibrant lives glowing on his screen. He took a shallow breath, the familiar tightness reminding him of the distance between his reality and theirs. It was a weight he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The first stone was placed in 3rd grade. It was art class. The assignment was simple. Draw your family. Leo remembered the feeling of the crayon in his hand, the waxy smell of the paper. He drew his mom, his dad, his dog. He was proud of the stick figures with their lopsided smiles. Then he saw Sarah's drawing. Her family was under a rainbow. Her people had fingers, eyelashes, clothes with patterns. The teacher held it up for the class. "Look at the detail in Sarah's drawing," she said. A warm feeling of pride turned cold in Leo's stomach. His drawing was no longer just his drawing. It was the drawing that wasn't as good as Sarah's. That was the first stone. A small, sharp pebble of inadequacy. The stones kept coming. In middle school, it was the math test grade, compared to the boy who sat next to him. In high school, it was the college acceptance letters that others received. Each event was another stone added to the pile. At first, they were light, almost unnoticeable, but over years they accumulated. The weight became familiar, a constant companion. He learned to walk with a slight hunch, to accommodate the burden. There was a strange comfort in it. The weight was proof he was paying attention, that he was aware of where he stood. It felt like motivation, but it was really just an anchor. He measured his worth not by his own satisfaction, but by his position relative to everyone else. The pile grew from a handful of pebbles to a heavy sack he carried on his shoulders everywhere he went. He didn't realize he was building the load himself. Each glance at a report card posted on the wall, each overheard conversation about summer vacations, was another small stone picked up and added to the collection. The habit became so ingrained it felt like instinct. The goal was no longer to feel good about his own progress. The goal was to make sure his pile of stones wasn't smaller than anyone else's. He lost sight of what his own path felt like, concerned only with how it looked from the outside. His morning began not with a stretch, but with a reach for his phone. The screen's light was the first thing he saw. The daily load began its descent. He scanned messages, but his real focus was elsewhere. He checked social media profiles like a foreman inspecting a worksite. Who got a new job? Who bought a house? Who was on a vacation he could only dream of? A mental checklist ran in the background of his mind, a constant tally of his perceived shortcomings. I should be further along by now. I should have that by now. I should be there by now. The weight manifested physically. He noticed it in the tight knot between his shoulder blades, a permanent fixture of tension. His breath was often short, as if the stones on his chest prevented his lungs from fully expanding. A low-grade fatigue followed him through the day, a drain on his energy that no amount of coffee could fix. The burden of comparison was a tax on his vitality, paid every hour. It stole the joy from his own small victories. When he finally finished a difficult project at work, the feeling of accomplishment was brief, immediately overshadowed by the thought, but Mark started his own company. When he enjoyed a quiet weekend, a voice would whisper, "You should be networking, building your brand." His goals became distorted reflections of others' lives. He pursued a certification not because he was passionate about the subject, but because someone he admired had it. He felt a constant pressure to perform, to present a life that looked as put together as the ones he saw online, all while feeling a profound sense of inadequacy underneath the surface. It was an exhausting dance, a performance for an invisible audience whose approval he could never truly win. The energy required to maintain the appearance, while simultaneously carrying the heavy, secret knowledge of his own perceived failures, left him perpetually drained. He was living a life measured against everyone else's highlight reel, and he was always falling short. The moment of awareness came on a Tuesday, not with a loud crash, but with a quiet, piercing silence. His friend, Ben, had been trying to reach him all afternoon. Ben was celebrating. He'd just sold his first short story, a dream he'd worked toward for a decade. The notifications buzzed on Leo's phone, but Leo was deep in another scroll, comparing his own stagnant writing projects to the seemingly instant success of an acquaintance online. He saw Ben's name flash, but the weight on his chest felt too heavy to lift, to make space for genuine happiness for someone else. He'd call back later, he told himself. He just needed to finish this one thing. He finally listened to the voicemail hours later as he walked home in the dark. Ben's voice was bright, excited, but there was a slight edge to it. "Hey man, really wanted to tell you the news. I know you're busy. Anyway, talk soon." The message ended. Leo stopped walking. The silence after the beep was louder than the train. He had missed it. He had been so preoccupied with the imaginary lives on a screen, measuring his own lack, that he had missed a real, important moment in the life of a real friend. The weight on his chest didn't feel like motivation anymore. It felt like a cage. It was a barrier between him and the people he cared about. Standing there on the sidewalk, he felt the burden with a new, startling clarity. It wasn't a part of him. It was something he was carrying. He had picked up each stone himself. This realization was not a shout. It was a whisper, but it was undeniable. The weight was optional. He walked the rest of the way home with a strange sensation, a flicker of lightness beneath the heavy familiarity. That night, he placed his phone on the dresser across the room, instead of on his nightstand. It was a small, almost insignificant act, but it felt like a declaration, the first conscious choice to create distance from the source of the stones. The fear arrived immediately. Who would he be without this constant measuring? Without the anxiety that he was falling behind, what would motivate him? The weight, for all its misery, had become a twisted comfort. It was a known quantity. The prospect of setting it down felt terrifyingly empty. What if, without it, he simply drifted? What if he discovered he was, in fact, as inadequate as he feared? The fear was a cold hand on his shoulder, urging him to pick the phone back up, to resume the familiar scroll. But the memory of Ben's voice, and the quiet shame of having missed his joy, was a stronger pull. He took a slow breath, and for the first time, he didn't reach for the device. He just let the fear sit there, acknowledging it without giving it control. The next morning, Leo began an experiment. One day, he would try, for just one day, to not actively compare his life to anyone else's. The alarm went off, and his hand twitched toward the empty space on the nightstand. The habit was a deep groove. He sat up and looked at the phone across the room. He breathed in, 4 counts. He held it for 2. The urge to check was a physical pull, a nervous energy in his hands. He breathed out 6 counts. He did not get up. The practice was not about stopping the thoughts. That was impossible. The thoughts came, as they always did. I wonder what projects everyone is starting today. I bet they're already being productive. Instead of engaging them, fueling them with more scrolling, he just noticed them. He imagined the thoughts as birds landing on a wire outside his window. He saw them, acknowledged their presence, and then let them fly away. He gave his mind a different job, to notice his own progress, however small. He had woken up on time. That was a victory. He had made his bed. Another small win. The goal was to redirect the energy usually spent on comparison back onto his own path. By midday, a strange sensation began to bloom in his chest. It wasn't excitement or dramatic change, it was space. The constant mental chatter of measurement had quieted from a roar to a murmur. The physical tightness in his shoulders felt less like a clenched fist, and more like a hand that was slowly opening. At lunch, he ate a sandwich without feeling the need to photograph it for some imaginary audience. He tasted the bread, the cheese, the mustard. The experience was simple, and it was entirely his. He read a book for 10 minutes, and his mind didn't drift to what he should be reading to appear more intelligent. He just read. The most profound moment came later. He saw a post from an old colleague about a major career achievement. The old habit fired instantly, a sharp pang, a cold stone ready to drop. But this time, he paused. He took a breath. He noticed the feeling of envy, the tightening in his stomach. And then, he consciously added another feeling, genuine admiration. He thought, good for her. Her success does not make my journey any less valuable. The stone didn't drop. It dissolved. The space in his chest felt a little wider, a little lighter. He was discovering a fundamental truth he had forgotten. Other people's paths were simply their paths. They existed on a separate map. Walking his own road with attention and care did not require him to carry the weight of every other traveler's journey. The load was not his to bear. This became his new practice, not a single, grand gesture of transformation, but a series of small, steady choices. He created simple rituals. Each morning, before looking at his phone, he would write down one thing he was grateful for in his own life. It wasn't about grand achievements. It was the warmth of his coffee, the sun through the window. This small act grounded him in his own reality before the outside world could intrude with its comparisons. He learned to celebrate the successes of others without the shadow of self-criticism. It felt awkward at first, like speaking a new language. But with each genuine "that's amazing for you," the muscle of compassion grew stronger. The energy he had spent on envy was now freed up for real connection. Conversations with friends became deeper because he was truly present, not secretly measuring his life against theirs. He started checking in with a simple question. Is this choice aligned with my values, or am I chasing someone else's metric? The answers weren't always clear, but the asking itself was the habit that mattered. The burden didn't vanish overnight, but it lightened, day by day, choice by choice. The transformation was subtle. It was the feeling of standing up a little straighter, breathing a little deeper. The anchor had become a buoy. Leo realized the weight was never mandatory. It was a load he had learned to carry. Letting it go was the real work. The practice continues, a gentle choosing of his own path, his own quiet measure of a life well lived. The journey is lighter now. I encourage you to notice if you're carrying a weight that isn't yours. See what happens when you choose to set it down. Even for a moment,